Snow fell thick enough to swallow sound itself. The forward operating base drowned in white, wind-cutting skin like razors. When the woman stepped
Zulu
down
squad,
from
this
the
is
battered
Echo 1.
armored transport,
Weapons free,
a private
engage on
blurted
sight.
out,
Move to
"Who
the
is she?"
objective.
No one
Solid
answered.
copy, Echo
Only
1.
the SEAL team
Moving.
leader standing nearby gave a slight nod, eyes fixed on the snow-shrouded horizon. "Watch," he said. 30 minutes later, the entire unit would
We hit
understand
the
why
target
in
zone
war.
at 0600.
Some names don't
No
need
deviations.
introduction. They only need to be
Understood,
witnessed.
but we need to secure
The
this ridge
forward
first to
operating base
maximize our
sat
vantage
like a
point.
frozen wound in the mountain range. 3 weeks of relentless winter had buried supply routes, grounded air support, and turned every patrol into a game of survival
We have to move
against
now.
both
The
enemy
target is
forces
vulnerable here.
and the
If we
elements
route the support
themselves.
team through this
Private
pass,
First
we
Class
risk
Derek
flanking.
Holloway
It's a
stamped
calculated
his
risk.
boots against the
Execute
packed
the plan.
snow outside the operations tent, trying to restore feeling to his toes. 22 years old, 3 months in country, and still convinced he understood how war worked. The cold had taught him otherwise, but pride dies slower than flesh. Movement on the access road, called out Corporal Vincent Torres from the observation post. Every weapon in the compound shifted toward the single vehicle crawling through the blizzard. The armored transport was older than most of the men watching it, plates scarred from encounters no maintenance log would ever record. It stopped 30 meters from the command center. The rear door opened. She emerged into the storm like she'd been born from it. No rank insignia, no unit patch, just winter gear that had seen use and a rifle case strapped across her back. Dark hair pulled tight, face weathered by more than just this season's cold. Maybe 35, maybe 50, exposure writes its own calendar on human features. "Who the hell is that?" Derek whispered to Torres. The corporal just shook his head, but his posture had changed. Straighter, more alert. Lieutenant Commander Nathan Cross stood in the command center doorway. 6'2", SEAL team operator with 14 years of shadows in his wake. He didn't salute, didn't speak, just gave that single, almost imperceptible nod. The woman walked past him into the warmth without acknowledgement. Derek looked at Torres again. "Seriously, who?" "Shut up and watch," Torres said. Not unkind, but final. Inside the operations center, Captain Mitchell Brennan was losing his fourth argument with reality in as many hours. The situation map showed what everyone already knew. 12 kilometers northeast, a reconnaissance team was pinned down in a valley that would become their grave if someone didn't extract them before nightfall. Problem was, every solution required visibility, and the storm had reduced visibility to the length of an outstretched arm. "We can't fly," the aviation officer said for the third time. "Wind shear would rip a helicopter apart. Ground assault puts us in the same kill box as the recon team," added the tactical officer. "So, we wait for them to die?" Brennan's voice was ice over fury. The door opened. Wind howled in, along with Cross and the woman. "Sir," Cross said. "This is he," paused, choosing words carefully. "Our specialist." Brennan studied her. "I wasn't notified of any specialist arriving." "You weren't supposed to be," she said. Her voice carried no accent but felt like it had traveled from somewhere else entirely. "I need to see your wind maps." "Excuse me?" She was already moving to the topographical display, eyes scanning terrain elevations with mechanical precision. Wind patterns. Thermal layers. Barometric pressure readings for the last 6 hours. The meteorological officer glanced at Brennan, who gave a tight nod. Numbers appeared on the screen. She studied them in silence that stretched past comfort into tension. When she finally spoke, it was to Cross, not the captain. The mission brief said, 900 hours? Change it to 1330. "That's 4.5 hours from now," Brennan cut in. 4.5 hours those men don't have. She turned to face him. No hostility, no deference, just flat statement of fact. In 4.5 hours, the wind will shift 23 degrees northwest. The thermal layer will drop 200 meters. You'll have a 14-minute window where conditions are survivable for both the extraction team and the targets. How can you possibly... Because I've been reading mountain weather systems for 17 years, and because 3 days ago I watched this same pressure system move through identical terrain 800 kilometers west. She pointed to the map. "Your recon team is here. You want to approach from the southeast, yes?" The tactical officer nodded slowly. "That's why you'll fail. Southeast puts you downwind of their position in a narrow valley. Any fire support becomes lethal to both sides." Her finger traced a different route. Northwest approach. Higher elevation. Longer hike. But when the wind shifts, you'll have clear firing lanes and the storm at your back. Silence filled the room. Staff Sergeant Coleman Walsh, 20 years in special operations and allergic to bullshit, leaned forward. Ma'am, with respect, northwest approach puts us on an exposed ridgeline. We'd be targets. You would be if you were standing, she agreed. You won't be. You'll be prone, dug into snow positions I'm going to mark for you, using the terrain depression at grid November 7-4. Walsh pulled up the location. His expression shifted from skepticism to grudging attention. That's actually concealment. It's the only concealment within effective range. She looked at Brennan. I'll need 2 spotters, thermal gear, and ammunition specifications for your long-range rifle platforms. Who are you? Brennan asked. Not hostile now, genuinely curious. Cross stepped forward. Sir, she's here because I requested her. Her record is... He stopped. Started again. Her record doesn't exist. Not in any system you can access. Then how do I know? You don't, the woman said simply. But in 4 hours, you'll either have 12 men coming home or 12 families getting notifications. Your choice, which one you want to risk. Brennan looked at Cross for a long moment. Cross held his gaze. I'd trust her with my life, sir. Have trusted her with my life. The captain made his decision. Operational authority granted. Brief your team. She was already moving toward the door. I don't have a team. I have a rifle and a window of opportunity. Make sure your people stay out of my firing lanes. The briefing room filled quickly. SEALs, Army Rangers on attached duty, combat controllers, men who'd seen every flavor of hell the planet offered. They eyed the woman with the same expression Derek had worn earlier. Who is this, and why should we care? Listen up, Cross began. Mission parameters have changed. We extract at 1330 hours via northwest approach, following a route our specialist has marked. He pulled up the tactical map. Our specialist? Lieutenant Jake Morrison, SEAL Team 3. Couldn't hide the edge in his voice. We running daycare now? Cross didn't rise to the bait. You have questions about the route, ask her. You have questions about anything else, keep them to yourself. I have a question. Walsh raised his hand like a student. Ma'am, this northwest route you marked 6 positions along the ridgeline. That suggests coordinated fire, but you said you don't have a team. I don't need coordinated fire. She was bent over the map, marking elevation points with precise movements. I need clear angles and wind calculation. The 6 positions are for you. I'll be here. She tapped a spot 200 meters higher than the others. Morrison leaned in to study it. Jesus, that's got to be 1,500 meters from the target zone. 1,700 actually. 1820 if the recon team retreats to secondary position. No one makes that shot in these conditions. She didn't look up from her notations. I do. With all respect, ma'am, I've been shooting for 12 years. Then you know that wind at altitude creates spiral drift, that temperature affects powder burn rate, and that in a whiteout you can't use visual references. Now she met his eyes. You also know that talking about shooting and actually shooting are different things. So here's what's going to happen. At 1330, you're going to provide suppressive fire on the marked coordinates. I'm going to remove their command structure, and those 12 men are going to walk out alive. Any other questions? Silence. Walsh cleared his throat. Just one. What do we call you? She considered this. You don't. At noon, Derek found himself assigned to supply detail hauling ammunition to the marked positions along the northwest route. The storm had intensified, turning a 20-minute hike into an hour of stumbling through drifts that wanted to swallow him whole. The woman moved ahead of him like gravity didn't apply to her the same way. She carried her rifle case, a pack that looked older than Derek's grandfather, and somehow made it look effortless. Ma'am? He called out, immediately feeling stupid for not knowing what else to say. She stopped, turned, waited. This position you marked 7-4 Charlie, the one for you. There's no cover there. There will be. She resumed walking. When they reached the ridgeline, Derek understood. What had looked like open ground on the map was actually a natural depression, carved by centuries of wind patterns. 2 meters deep, 3 meters wide, invisible until you were standing in it. How did you? Topographical lines show depression. Wind patterns show where snow accumulates versus where it gets stripped away. This spot gets stripped. She set down her pack, began unpacking with methodical efficiency. In 30 minutes, this will be the only position on this ridge not buried in drift snow. She was assembling her rifle. Derek had seen weapons before, obviously, but this was something else. Components fit together with the precision of a surgical instrument. Barrel, receiver, stock, optics that looked like they cost more than his entire year's salary. That's not standard issue, he said, then felt stupid again for stating the obvious. No, she agreed. She was cleaning the barrel with a cloth that seemed too delicate for military use. Standard issue is designed for soldiers who shoot at 300 meters. This is designed for problems that exist at distances where most people can't see the target. 1,700 meters, in a blizzard, if necessary. She mounted the scope, checked alignment with movements so practiced they looked like breathing. Then she did something Derek had never seen before. She removed her glove, held her bare hand up to the wind. "What are you?" Feeling the granular structure of wind. Her eyes were closed. At this altitude, wind isn't a single force. It's layers. Each layer moves at different speeds, different temperatures. You can't measure that with instruments not accurately. You have to feel it. That's impossible. She opened her eyes, pulled her glove back on. In 47 minutes, I'm going to prove otherwise. 13:30 arrived with no fanfare, just the crackling of radios and the eternal howl of wind. "Recon team. This is actual. Cross-transmitted. Stand by for extraction support. Do not break position until you have clear route confirmation." "Copy. Actual." The voice on the other end was tight with stress. "We've got movement on our perimeter. Multiple contacts." "Confirmed. Support is inbound." Along the ridgeline, SEALs settled into their positions. Morrison checked his rifle, standard issue M110, effective to 800 meters in good conditions. These weren't good conditions. "Visual on target zone," Walsh reported. "I can barely see the valley floor." "Specialist, you have eyes on?" Cross asked. In her depression 200 meters higher, the woman adjusted her scope with minute precision. "I have thermals. 4 targets. Valley floor. Grid, November 7-6. Confirmed. You are authorized." "Wait." Everyone froze. "Wait for what?" Morrison's voice carried frustration. She didn't answer. Her breathing had slowed to the point of invisibility. The rifle's stock welded to her shoulder like it had grown there. Derek, lying in the snow 50 meters below her position, couldn't see what she was seeing, couldn't understand what she was waiting for. 12 seconds passed. The rifle spoke once, a sound the storm ate instantly. "Target down," Walsh said, surprise evident. "Jesus. Confirmed kill at how far was that?" 1,800 meters, the woman said calmly. "Give the round 4 more seconds to work." "What?" On the other end, the radio erupted. "Actual. We're taking wait. Their squad leader just dropped. They're breaking formation." "Second target," the woman said. 1,740 meters, compensating for crosswind factor. Another shot. Another piece of thunder the storm swallowed. "Confirmed. Another kill." The recon team's stress was replaced by disbelieving hope. "They're retreating." Morrison was staring uphill toward the woman's position, mouth open. She's shooting targets we can't even see." Third target acquiring command position. Her voice remained flat, mechanical, adjusting for thermal updraft from valley floor. Cross understood first. She's reading the entire battlefield through thermal optics. Wind, temperature, elevation. She's calculating it all in real time. Shot 3. Their radio operator is down. Actual, they've lost all coordination. Walsh lowered his rifle slowly. "I don't need to fire. She's dismantling their entire command structure from a distance we couldn't even dream about." Fourth target, the woman reported. 1,900 meters, extreme angle, minimal hit probability. "Then don't," Morrison started. The rifle fired. 5 seconds later, "Holy shit, confirmed. They're running, all hostiles in full retreat." The ridgeline fell silent, except for wind. Derek realized he'd been holding his breath. Around him, men who'd seen combat in 6 countries stared uphill at the depression where the woman was already breaking down her rifle. "What the hell did we just see?" he whispered. Torres, lying next to him, shook his head slowly. "Something that's not supposed to exist." The extraction went smooth after that. The recon team moved out under cover from the ridge positions, cover they never needed, because there was no one left to shoot at them. By 1500 hours, everyone was back at the FOB, stamping snow off boots and letting the impossible heat of the operations center thaw frozen fingers. The woman was gone. "Where did she?" Derek started. "She left," Cross said. He was standing at the map display, staring at nothing. 10 minutes ago, said she had another situation developing 200 kilometers south. "She just left?" "That's what she does." Brennan emerged from his office with a folder, the kind of folder that came from classified archives and usually stayed there. "Commander Cross," a word. They stepped aside, but Derek was close enough to hear fragments. "Checked every database we have access to." "Told you, sir, she doesn't exist in those systems." "Found a reference. Operation Blackstone, 6 years ago. Mission failure, entire team lost except. Wasn't a failure. Official record says otherwise. Official record is what they needed it to say. Brennan's voice dropped lower. She saved your life. She saved 8 lives. Cross met his captain's eyes, including mine. But the mission failed on paper because success would have exposed methods we couldn't afford to acknowledge. So they buried her. Took her name out of every file, every commendation, every after-action report. Why would she accept that? Because she believed in the mission more than the medal. Because she understood that some victories need to stay invisible. Brennan closed the folder slowly. How did you get her to come here? I didn't. I put out a request through channels that shouldn't exist. She answered because 12 men were going to die. And she doesn't let that happen when she can prevent it. And now? Now she's gone. Back to whatever shadows she lives in. Until the next time someone needs a problem solved that can't be solved by anyone else. Morrison joined them, holding his rifle like he was reconsidering everything he knew about marksmanship. Sir, I need to know. What she did today, is that even possible? 1,800 meters, 0 visibility, shifting winds. You saw it happen, Cross said. I know what I saw. I don't believe what I saw. Then maybe you understand why her name isn't in any file. Cross turned back to the map. Some people operate at a level that breaks the model. You can't explain them with manuals or doctrine. You just point them at the problem and trust the outcome. At 1,800 hours, the situation changed. Actual, this is Overwatch 2. The transmission came from the observation post Derek had started his day at. We've got movement, multiple vehicles, heavy weapon signatures. Grid Quebec, 2-3. Brennan was at the map instantly. That's our supply route. Not anymore, Cross said grimly. That's our exit route. They're cutting us off. The aviation officer shook his head. Still can't fly. Wind's gotten worse, not better. How many vehicles? 4 confirmed. Looks like technical trucks with mounted weapons. And, shit, sir, that's a mortar team setting up position. The operations center crystallized into focused tension. Outside, the storm had become something beyond natural, a white wall that turned the world into guesswork. They're not just cutting the route, Walsh said, studying the map. They're positioning for siege. Pin us here, wait for the weather to do their work. We can fight out, Morrison suggested. Through 400 meters of open ground against mounted weapons and mortar support? Brennan's voice was flat. We'd lose half the unit. The radio crackled. Actual, Overwatch 2. Mortar team is calibrating. I think they've got our range. Derek felt ice that had nothing to do with temperature. He'd been in firefights, survived ambushes. But this was different, trapped by weather and time, and an enemy who'd chosen their moment perfectly. Options, Brennan demanded. Silence. Then Cross's radio chirped a different frequency, one Derek didn't recognize. Cross. He listened, expression unreadable. Listened more. You're certain? Pause. That's not I understand. He looked at Brennan. Sir, we have an asset in position. What asset? Everyone's accounted for. Not everyone. Cross pointed to a ridge overlooking the enemy position. She never left. Said she had a feeling about this location. Morrison's eyes widened. She's been out there for 3 hours? She's been tracking this vehicle convoy since they entered the valley. Cross was already pulling up coordinates. She says she can neutralize the mortar team and command vehicle. We'd have a 90-second window to break contact and move to alternate position. One shooter against multiple hardened targets. One specialist against targets who don't know she exists. Brennan made the decision. Authorization granted. All units, prepare for immediate tactical movement on my signal. Cross transmitted on that strange frequency. You're authorized. Godspeed. The response came back in that same flat, emotionless voice. No God involved. Just mathematics. She'd been waiting for 3 hours and 17 minutes. Cold had stopped being sensation and become identity. The rifle was an extension of thought. Wind patterns painted pictures only she could read. The mortar team was exposed. They'd prioritized firing angle over cover. A decision they'd made because the weather created its own concealment. They didn't understand that some eyes saw through storm the way others saw through glass. First target. Mortar team lead. She spoke into the radio. Not for permission, but for record. Range. 1,200 meters. Wind. 15-knot crosswind. Gusting 20. Angle. Negative 43 degrees. Probability. 87%. Mathematics didn't care about cold. Physics didn't negotiate with weather. She fired. The mortar team's leader dropped, and chaos followed, but organized chaos. These weren't amateurs. A second man moved to take command, and that's when she understood. They had discipline. That made them dangerous, also made them predictable. Second target, assuming command position. Her hands moved across the rifle's adjustment knobs with blind precision. Range, 12-20. Wind shift compensating. Probability, 79%. Shot 2. The replacement commander fell before he could give his first order. Now the panic was real. Men scattered for cover, but their vehicles were positioned for offense, not defense. Excellent for attacking a static position. Terrible for protecting against a threat they couldn't locate. Command vehicle. She tracked the technical truck with the mounted gun. Target, gunner. Secondary target, vehicle commander. Tertiary target, radio operator. Cross's voice came through, steady. You're authorized for all targets. I know. She fired 3 times in 18 seconds. Each shot a separate calculation, each calculation perfect. The technical's crew collapsed like puppet strings cut. Remaining hostiles breaking contact, Walsh reported from the FOB. They're running blind. They don't even know where the fire's coming from. Because she'd chosen her position with 3-hour foresight. Because she'd read the terrain, and weather, and enemy doctrine, and calculated where they'd commit, where they'd be vulnerable, where she'd be invisible. The 4th vehicle tried to retreat. She put a round through its engine block at 1,300 meters. All hostiles neutralized or fleeing, she transmitted. Your exit route is clear. Recommend immediate movement before weather deteriorates further. Copy, Cross said. What's your extraction plan? I don't have one. Storm's getting worse. You need to move now. We're not leaving you. Yes, you are. Her voice carried no emotion, no plea. I've got enough gear for 2 days. Storm will break by then. I'll walk out. That's a death sentence. Only if I were someone else. She was already disassembling the rifle, packing components with practiced efficiency. 2 days, Commander. I've survived longer and worse. Morrison's voice cut in. Ma'am, with respect, no one survives 2 days in this. I do. She sealed the rifle case, shouldered her pack. Actual. Recommend you move immediately. I'm going dark for weather conservation. Wait, but she'd already switched off the radio. Sound discipline, energy conservation, survival protocol. The storm howled agreement. The FOB evacuated in 43 minutes. Organized chaos, equipment loaded, positions abandoned. They moved through the exit route she'd cleared, past the burning vehicle she'd disabled, under the ridge, where she'd saved them all. Derek looked up at that ridge as they passed. Nothing. Just snow and rock and wind that wanted to kill. She's really staying out there? He asked Cross. The commander didn't answer immediately. He was staring at that same ridge, expression complicated. 6 years ago, he finally said, I was part of a team in a situation similar to this. Different country, same impossible conditions. We were 12 hours from being overrun, extraction impossible, air support grounded. What happened? She happened. Cross kept walking, but his voice carried memory's weight. She was embedded as an intelligence asset, not supposed to engage in combat, wasn't her role. But when the situation went to hell, she picked up a rifle and held an entire ridge by herself for 7 hours. 7 hours? Killed or wounded 43 enemy combatants. Burned through 1,100 rounds of ammunition. When we finally extracted, she had 3 bullet wounds and hypothermia so severe she should have been dead. Cross's jaw tightened. Mission got classified. Her part got erased. Official record says we lost that position and barely escaped. Real record says she refused to let us die. Why erase her? Because success would have revealed capabilities we couldn't acknowledge. Methods that don't exist on paper. She understood that. Agreed to disappear rather than compromise future operations. He finally looked at Derek. She didn't make that choice because she was ordered to. She made it because she believes in the work more than the recognition. That's why you trust her. I trust her because she's proven trustworthy. But I respect her because she doesn't need the proof. Morrison joined them, looking back at the storm-shrouded ridge. She saved 8 people 6 years ago, 12 today. How many times has she done this? As many times as necessary, Cross said. And you'll never know about most of them. The convoy moved south through the storm, leaving her behind because she'd ordered them to, because she'd survived worse before, because she'd calculated her survival as probable, while theirs without her sacrifice wasn't. Derek wondered if anyone had ever calculated the cost of being that good at saving others. 41 hours later, the storm broke. The sky cleared like a curtain pulled back from glass, revealing mountains that looked carved from frozen light. The temperature dropped further, a hard, clear cold that felt cleaner than the storm's oppressive weight. At the new fob location, Derek was pulling guard duty when he saw movement on the approach road. Single figure, walking, carrying a pack and rifle case that looked too heavy for someone who'd spent 2 days in conditions designed to kill. "Contact approaching," he called out, more from protocol than concern. Cross was outside before Derek finished the transmission. The woman walked into the compound like she'd taken a casual stroll instead of surviving what should have been impossible. Her gear showed weather damage, ice accumulation, wind wear. Her face showed nothing. "Ma'am," Cross said, not quite a question, but close. "Commander." She set down her pack, not in exhaustion but efficiency. Storm broke at 0600. Made better time than expected. "You look functional," she said, cutting off whatever assessment he'd been forming. "I need to file the after-action report, then I have a situation requiring attention in Estonia." Estonia. Problem requiring specific skill sets. She was already moving toward the operations center. Should be resolved within 5 days. Brennan emerged, looking at her like she was a ghost. "We thought." "Yes," she acknowledged. "People often do." "Is there coffee?" There was coffee. She drank it black, hot enough to cause burns, while briefing the situation with the precision of someone who'd spent 2 days reviewing every detail in her mind. "Enemy force was probing for weakness," she concluded. "Your position is known. Recommend rotation within 72 hours. "Already scheduled," Brennan said. He was studying her with open curiosity now. "How did you survive out there?" "Snow cave, caloric management, understanding of wind patterns for thermal regulation." She set down the empty cup. "Standard survival protocol." "That's not standard," Morrison said quietly. She looked at him. Really looked. For the first time since returning. "You're right. Standard would be to die. I've never been comfortable with standard." A ghost of something not quite humor, not quite acknowledgement crossed her face. Then it was gone. "I need transport to the airfield." She shouldered her pack again. "Estonia won't wait." Cross walked her to the vehicle. Derek watched from a distance, saw them exchange words no one else would hear. Saw Cross nod once, sharply. Saw the woman touch his shoulder brief, meaningful. Then she was climbing into the transport, and the engine was starting, and she was leaving the way she'd arrived, without ceremony, without fanfare, without anything except the certainty that somewhere, someone needed problems solved that couldn't be solved by anyone else. The vehicle disappeared into the distance. "She didn't even tell us her name," Derek said. Walsh, standing nearby, shook his head. "Kid, people like that don't have names. They have reputations." "What's hers?" "Same as it's always been." Walsh turned back to his duties. "The person you want on the ridge when everything goes to hell." 3 months later, Derek was in a different country, under a different sky, at a different FOB that felt exactly the same as all the others. New faces, same war, the eternal cycle. He was briefing a group of fresh arrivals privates who looked at the world the way he had before the winter, before the storm, before the ridge. "So," one of them asked, "what's the worst situation you've been in?" Derek considered this. Thought about snow and cold and a convoy that should have died. Thought about a woman who'd held a ridge alone while a storm tried to kill her. "We got pinned down," he said carefully. "Weather was hell. Enemy had us cut off. Should have been a massacre." "What happened?" "Someone saved us." He kept his voice level. "One shooter. No support. Just solved the problem." Derek smiled. "Never learned their name." "How's that possible?" "Because some people don't operate with names. They operate with capability." He pointed to the mountains beyond the wire. "Out there, when conditions get impossible and options run out, occasionally someone shows up who changes the equation. You don't question it. You don't ask for credentials. You just..." He remembered Cross's words. That first day in the storm. You just watch. The new arrivals looked skeptical, the way Derek had been skeptical before he'd seen the impossible made routine. That was fine. They'd learn, or they wouldn't. Either way, somewhere in the world, on some ridge no one could find on a map, a woman was calculating wind patterns and solving problems that shouldn't have solutions. The work didn't need witnesses. It just needed doing. Later that night, Derek was alone in the operations center when a classified message came through. He wasn't supposed to read it. Clearance levels kept people in appropriate boxes. But the message terminal was next to his workstation, and he was young enough to be curious, old enough to know better. The message header read, "Situation resolved. Estonia. Minimal collateral. Specialist redeploying. No name, no details, just confirmation that somewhere, something impossible had been made possible. Derek thought about that ridge in the storm, about the woman who'd stayed behind because numbers said she'd survive and others wouldn't, about Cross's quiet respect, Walsh's gruff acknowledgement, Morrison's disbelieving awe, about being so good at saving lives that your own life became an afterthought. He logged off the terminal, stepped outside into night air that was cold but not killing. Stars overhead, clear enough to navigate by. Somewhere, she was looking at the same stars, calculating the next problem, moving toward the next impossible situation. The legend didn't need a name. It just needed to exist. Proof that when everything failed, when weather and enemy and fate conspired toward death, sometimes not always, but sometimes capability arrived in time. Derek went back to his post, carrying that knowledge the way she carried her rifle, as tool, as responsibility, as promise that some battles wouldn't be lost. Not while people who didn't need names still answered the call. The storm came back 3 days after she left, burying the ridge where she'd made those impossible shots. Snow filled the depression she'd fired from, erased the position, rewrote the landscape until no evidence remained of what had happened there. Wind smoothed the trails she'd taken walking out. Temperature fluctuations destroyed any thermal signature. Time itself conspired with weather to eliminate proof, which was exactly how she preferred it. In an office that officially didn't exist, someone updated a file that officially wasn't maintained. The entry was brief. Operation: Frozen Ridge. Status: Success. Casualties: 0. Friendly. 11. Hostile. Recognition: None authorized. Operative: Redacted. Notes: Asset continues to operate at exceptional level. Recommend continued deployment as situations require. The file closed. The screen went dark. Somewhere, a phone rang. Someone answered, listened, asked no questions that mattered. When, they said. A pause. Understood. I'll be there. The call ended. Equipment was packed. Movement began. Another situation. Another ridge. Another group of people who would live because someone showed up who shouldn't exist. The work continued. The legend grew. The name stayed buried, exactly where it belonged, in silence, in shadow, in the space between impossible and inevitable, where some people chose to live so others could survive. Years later, someone would ask Derek Holloway about his service, about the close calls, the near misses, the times death had knocked and somehow missed its appointment. He'd mention the storm, the ridge, the woman who'd appeared and disappeared like weather itself. What was her name? They'd ask. And Derek would smile, remembering Cross's words, Walsh's respect, Morrison's awe. I never learned it, he'd say, but I learned something more important. What? That excellence doesn't require recognition. That some people measure success by lives saved, not medals earned. That when you ask who someone is and the only answer is watch, that tells you everything you need to know. The person would look confused, because the story didn't make sense by conventional measures. Heroes have names. Legends require recognition. The narrative demands identification, but Derek would just shake his head, understanding what they couldn't. Some footprints are meant to be erased. Some names are meant to stay unspoken. Some legends live best in the space between question and answer, where watch is the only introduction necessary. And somewhere, on a ridge no one can find, wind continues to erase evidence of the impossible made routine, the inhuman made human, the legendary made real, until the next storm comes, until the next call arrives, until someone, somewhere, asks the wrong question and gets the right answer. Watch.